Actually, road mapping customer success maturity. It's a hot topic. We have Jim Coleman, our SVP of Customer Success, here with us today. He's going to be the speaker and walk you through the framework that we've put together. Before I hand it over to Jim, I'm going to give you guys a quick announcement that we have launched Customer Success Summit 2018. It's the 6th annual event. It's going to be in downtown San Francisco at the Palace Hotel, March 5th and 6th. So I encourage everyone to check out customersuccesssummit.com and sign up, register, come to this industry event for best practices, network with your peers, collaborate, and definitely learn for your organization and for your company as a whole. So without further ado, like I said, Jim Coleman is here with us today, and I'm going to hand it over to him. Jim.
Hello, everybody. Glad you're all here to join us. So we're going to talk about maturity today, and one of the things we try to do is to make sure that this isn't really an academic discussion, right? We want this to be useful. We want this to be based around what are the actions that we can take, because this presentation, this concept that we're putting together here really has to do with two big questions that we get asked pretty regularly with respect to how do I do customer success? And for customers or for organizations that are new to it, it's really where do we start? You know, what are the things that we have to consider? What are the things that we do to make sure that our customer success effort is going to be a success? And with organizations that are a bit more along the way, they've maybe been running their own programs or transitioning from an account management model or really any other variation where they've got something in practice already, it's where do we go from here? So to answer this, we put together a maturity roadmap, and it really accomplishes a few things. Number one, this helps us to define the core processes and KPIs that we want to manage against. What are we trying to do? How do we make sure that we've got our bases covered? It can help you to assess and baseline your current capabilities and align any sort of future work and roadmap to advance the outcomes that are important to you and mitigate risks associated with customer success. The big one being churn, big surprise for everybody, right? And ultimately, this helps you to meet a market demand for a managed customer experience. We've all seen the numbers about high performers versus low performers relative to the market on customer success or customer experience management being vastly outperforming the market or underperforming the market as the case is. So it's very important to make sure that we have a solid model for how we consider the approach for working through your customer experience and your customer success team. The roadmap itself is pretty straightforward. It really starts off at the beginning here. We're talking about organizations that manage experience customer success through heroic actions. We'll talk about what each of these are in a moment. All the way up to one that as we sort of graduate through and build out more robust processes and more robust practices, up to the point where you've really built a culture of customer success and you're practicing continuous process improvement on those capabilities. We do have a staged model here that really talks about what are the things that we do from going from the ad hoc management to mapped processes to formally practicing customer success, to managing the experience, and ultimately to optimizing. So what are all the various things that we really want to consider along the way, obviously building on the steps before them. So starting from there, let's consider the starting point. This is really heroic. So customer success may be defined as a job, may not be. But this is what you see in very early organizations, that the discipline itself is very reactive, and often it relies on the heroic actions of individuals, and that's really putting in lots of hours or diving and catching to save an account. There isn't necessarily any formal management. You may have pieces of these capabilities available, but it's not really formalized yet. And this means you may or may not have a formal customer journey. You don't necessarily know where the customer is at any stage in the life cycle. Your customer data may be scattered among a few systems. Some folks that we've talked to actually will have a dozen or more different systems where their team who's managing customer success actually has to log back and forth between those different systems. Processes themselves may be undefined, or they may be inconsistent. They may be very basic things like, okay, well, I've got an onboarding process that's a checklist. I've got a renewal process that's a checklist, but not necessarily anything that's centralized and repeatable and manageable. In particular, one of the things that's very often here is that outside of maybe spreadsheets and email, there isn't necessarily a system to manage the success team or manage the success processes. And as I said, the heroism that you're relying on means that as a consequence of that, you're often being led by escalation. Not always, but it's a common symptom. So if we want to get out of this and move on to a better stage of maturity, we really want to get started by, number one, make sure that we know what the business objectives are for ourselves and for our customers, and what are the priorities, where do we share them, where do they align. Once you understand that, where are we both going? I mean, the concept of customer success is we're successful when our customers are successful, and likewise. Review the end-to-end journey. Make sure that you understand how you acquire customers, how you begin to enable them onto your offerings, how you get them to adopt, how you prove value, grow the account, grow their value over time, and ultimately retain and expand the relationship. Try to start getting an early segmentation of your customers. A lot of the common ones may be around different plans or products that they've bought from you. Might be based on geography, might be based on price point, might be based on industry, but start to experiment with a few different ways that you can segment out your customers so you can get an idea of what constitutes health. Typically looking at health as a predictor of churn or a likelihood of churn on any of those segments. Where you can, start to try and consolidate the data so that you can begin to define core processes. Again, go for the ones that are the most critical: onboarding, adoption, growth, and retention. These are the four that really you have to have locked down no matter what. How do we get customers in? How do we make sure that they grow their use and adopt the capabilities that you've delivered them? And then ultimately, how do we keep them? And just as important, we actually did a webinar a few weeks ago around continuous learning. This is something that we want to adopt as a practice, and that's setting a cadence for review. Make sure that we can take a look at the way that we're working, if what we're doing makes sense, if it functions the way that we want it to, and if it produces the outcomes that we're aiming for. Once we have this sort of capability mapped, we understand what the journey is. We understand what the segments are. We have some concept of health. May not be right, but it's the first pass, and it's good enough. We've got customer data and content. It's accessible to anyone who needs it. And again, this may not be in one place yet, but at least it's accessible and everyone knows where to get it. The delivery and process that you use for customer value attainment, it may vary quite a bit according to customers. So this is where we're trying to address goals and concerns through the life cycle, and you may still have a lot of variation because maybe we haven't gotten to the point where the full steps and all the details are entirely known. There'll be some experimentation. Customer success functions may or may not be centralized. It's great if they are, but it may still be split among a number of different groups. And while we have some ideas of what value attainment means, there can still be surprises. This is a case where you have false positives or false negatives, where if you have customers that are shining green, beautiful, amazing health, will cancel, or others who are showing absolutely bad, terrible health, and you're worried they're going to churn out, end up upselling. Right? This is one of the areas where we don't quite have a full grasp on all of the details around when a customer is fully healthy or if they're achieving full value. If you do, wonderful. So the things that we're trying to do here, if we have a beginning of a customer success organization, to really lock this down and make it work properly is to charter formally a customer success team with an accountable leader. This is where we start to have the conversations with organizations around, well, how do I structure the team? How do I compensate them? These are all concerns that you'll want to have absolutely at this point. You absolutely also want to build internal partnerships with the rest of the team. One of the things that we try to encourage, and we see with our most successful customers, is that it's a team sport. Everybody in the organization is responsible for a customer success, even though they may not be titled or on the team itself. But where you can build alignment between marketing, what are the ways that we can make sure that the alignment from external marketing and product marketing connect with customer marketing and any messaging that you're doing with your CS team. Likewise, are there any lessons learned in the sales process that you can use on renewals and upsells? How do we interface with product and so on? It's very important to build those internal partnerships to make sure that the entire organization is really set on the customer success. At this point, especially with a formal team, it's very important to aggregate the customer data into as few locations as possible. Having a central store of the data and the content from attributes about the customer, financial events, content, contracts, proposals, usage and adoption patterns throughout the product. The more you can consolidate, the easier it is to scale up the team. It also helps you to get a lot more information to segment out your customers. Again, this is a living, breathing thing that we do, especially with segmentation, to make sure that we understand what are the various ways that we might look at a customer. At this stage, and a lot of times, we're looking at segmentation by value. How do we incorporate valuetainment into health as well? If we're not doing so already, we're looking very closely on a regular basis at churn. What causes it? What doesn't cause it? And using that as inputs back into the health definition. So what you're looking at there is really how do we, with the inclusion of value as well as churn risk, how do we build a model that really gives us a good idea to have signals around what's actually very positive and what's actually potentially risky. This helps us to build an early warning system. So the thing that you're trying to do here is preempt escalations. And I'm using escalations loosely here. It doesn't necessarily mean a support escalation. It could be a business escalation. It could be a positive escalation. But the idea is if we can get to the point where we know or we have an idea faster than our customers do of an impending event, positive or negative, we're much closer and tighter and more intimate with the relationship with them, and we can provide a higher level of service. It allows us to be very proactive. And really making sure that we have open lines of communication with customers. Making sure that there are very easy ways for customers to provide feedback, whether it's on product or whether it's directly with an executive sponsor or related back to really other parts of the organization. How do we make sure that the customers understand and trust and are working in the relationship where they feel comfortable to raise issues or concerns or opportunities or really anything that's important to them, to make sure that there's that dialogue. This really allows us to, again, to understand them better and to be able to be more proactive. This brings us to the point where we actually have a formalized discipline. All of the things we just talked about there, moving from an early to a more mature practice. This is where everything is formalized. We've got standard processes defined. You may not have hundreds of different processes, but you at least know what the right approaches are. It's a chartered function. It's partnered with the rest of the business. We understand the events that drive positive and negative outcomes. We're regularly reviewing and optimizing the team. And also, again, with the partnership with the rest of the organization, a lot of the data that we have about the customer, the information that we have about the customer, is really shared and understood between the various teams. And this is part of that internal partnership that I mentioned. So moving beyond this, this is where CS really starts to take hold as part of the operating culture of the business. This is where we're really pulling back all of our best practices, manuals, plays, really beyond the sort of step-by-step of a process, and perhaps more around what's working or not working with messaging to customers, what's working or not working with the best way that we can make a call to them or to message the fact that they may need additional licenses. All of those things may apply, but it's really starting to understand, build a center of excellence or a repository even of best practices tools, templates that your team's able to reuse. We're also at this point typically moving out of in early stages. A lot of organizations will be really focused on really what's there in front of them. What's the next renewal? What's the next upsell? What's the next event that I have to be worried about? But as we move further and further into into high levels of maturity for this practice, we're starting to look more internally at what the lifetime value for the customer is. Likewise with customers, if you're not having long-term strategic value discussions, that's something that you'll want to take into account here. Also looking at when CSMs are looking at their book of business, there's a much higher value in looking at it as a portfolio management exercise, focusing quite a bit more on the finances and understanding the business model of the customers, and really, again, taking it out of the mode of what's in front of me and looking at the long-term strategy of what we're doing with customers and how we're investing in them and how we're both sharing value together. That also, again, ties back into the health and segmentation. At this point, we're not just using it to signal events, but we may also be looking at it in terms of how do we spend our resources? How do we prioritize our resources among our customers in ways that are most meaningful in the long run, both to them and to us? If we haven't done so already, align very closely with customer acquisition, right? So the idea that the signals and understanding of who are the high-value customers, who are the ones that are receiving the most value out of your offerings, tying that back into sales so that the relationship is very tight in terms of understanding where to best focus new customer acquisition. So again, this is something that the sales team ultimately will love because it helps them improve their win rate, because they're setting up for success any customer that comes in, and those customers that aren't a match and are more likely to churn out are really qualified out early. And if we haven't done so already, one of the areas here is really making sure that we have those strategic partnerships with the customers so that we can take our champions and really turn them into public advocates, sharing stories that are meaningful, that help to drive new conversations with existing customers, with new customers, but pulling back to the value of the shared value between the customers and your organization, so that you're able to build true advocates in the long run. And again, this is where everything starts to become proactive, data-driven, and a bit more analytical. But again, best practices, lifetime value and strategic value, prioritization of customers, and really building a machine for customer champions and advocacy. Now, as we try to go one level further, this top stage of maturity is really around full head first, dive right in, all the way to customer success, no longer being a practice and being more of a culture. This is where everybody in the organization, a customer-centric organization, understands that a customer success is everybody's business, whether or not you're titled as a customer success manager or part of that team. Customer partnerships, value and trust are really the hallmark of what we're aiming for. And with respect to the day-to-day operations, again, we're looking at that continuous process improvement, sometimes experimenting, but definitely looking at the root causes of what drives the process, what drives the success of how the interaction is working, how it's driving value. More importantly, how you're going to be driving value with that process 6 months or a year down the road, so that you understand what the roadmap is, so again, you can be more proactive with the customers. And that's really where, again, sort of at this top level, you're managing risks, you're looking at your opportunities well in advance, everything's embedded in the culture, and you're able to course correct proactively for the future. So in terms of where we go from here, at any stage, really, where you are along this continuum, look at some of the characteristics. Try to understand what your current maturity is. Ask questions. See if you get agreement with the rest of your team, your management, your other partners in the organization. For things like, do we actually have for example, if we're early along in the process, do we have an onboarding process? I'm sure everybody will say yes, but tell me, get the evidence to see if everybody understands what's there, everybody understands how it works, what are the ways that they could contribute, and that'll help you to understand, really are you there at level 1 or level 2? But work with the rest of your team and really try and triangulate where you are. Once you understand that, you really sort of want to take a crawl, walk, run. Everybody wants to dive straight into continuous optimization, but it's also important to make sure that we bridge the gaps before moving on to more complex things that take a bit longer to move the lever. And then look at this again, going back to that continuous learning, going back to the idea of the continuous improvement. Make sure to commit to evolving this on a regular basis. Some organizations are very good at this, others need work, but really you want to look at how the not just the business is doing, but how the process is working on a regular basis, maybe 2 or 4 times a year. Might be more frequent if you like as well. So this is the end of the content. I'm happy to take any questions. Christine, I don't know if we have any that are
we do.
Any that are in right now, but excellent.
And before I jump into questions, I didn't add a poll, but I'm going to go ahead and post this to the chat window. I would love if all of the audience members could share where you guys are right now on the maturity model. Go ahead and put that in your response in the chat window. It'd be great to know, just to get a gauge of, does this content and is this model appealing to you guys? Are you here today because you're at the beginning? Is it because you're a superstar and you're already at level 5? But Jim, one question that came in was, what if you have little bits of each stage, of each level? Then how do you actually decide which level you're at?
Well, if we're being formal about it, the way the models usually work is you're the lowest level that you accomplish, right? So if we have if we're optimizing everything except we don't have a customer journey mapped, I would say you probably need to map the journey, and you may not actually be a level 5 as you think. You're probably closer down to a 1, right? So typically what you're looking at is evaluating yourself on the lowest score. But for the purposes that we typically use this, it's really more about how do we advance and how do we look at the future roadmap for the year of what do we need to do as a CS organization. The score itself is great as a diagnostic, but beyond that, it doesn't have to be something to get really hung up over.
Great. So keep submitting questions in the chat window. We do have some time to take more. We do have a question from Jonathan. He wants to know more about the successful early warning system that you spoke about, and I think it was stage 2. And what measures do you typically look at, and how do you get an indicator of the event before it happens?
Right. So this is number one. A big piece of it again is consolidating the data, or having access to the data in a place that you can see these things. It can be done manually, except it's really, really hard. I think most or all of us have done some level of CS on a spreadsheet with email. Right. It can be done, but it's just a lot more manual effort. If you're able to pull that information into a system, into a centralized system like Totango, that can monitor for events, those are the things that's one of the most important things that you can do. Just because once you get a handle on the data, you can see at any given time what's the record look like, but what you're really watching for is changes. Did I see just a couple examples that I heard there were, what are some of the events that we're looking for? What happens if you have usage, if adoption rates drop by 10% over a week period, or 20%? That's something that you want to see CSM be able to go out and call on the customer to ask what's going on. There may be other information that we're watching for. Could be other data, other information. If we have a major change in in any of the financials about the customer, all of a sudden they stop paying their bills, or all of a sudden we get additional information around the interactions between the CS team and the customer. Those things as well can indicate events that we want to go look at. And again, it's not necessarily if X happens, churn occurs. nothing is ever quite that quite that direct. But the events that you're looking for can really help to understand, did something really positive happen, or did something really negative happen, or is it just a great excuse to go out and talk to the customer because something interesting happened?
Great. Thanks, Jim. We have a lot of questions coming in the questions
Great.
tab. So if someone wants to know, if you're in the heroic stage, how do you approach defining the customer health score? And before you answer that, I do want to mention we just did 2 great webinars last month on how do you build a customer health model, including the health score. So take a look at our on-demand webinar page. But if you want to give a high-level answer to that, Jim, that'd be great.
Yeah, definitely. And again, I think platforms and systems make these things a lot easier. But what you're looking at are what are the things that drive a customer's value or a likelihood for a risk, right? Those are the things that typically you'll want to look at in terms of health, and that can include characteristics about the company, the organization. That can include interactions between your organization and the customer. Are you meeting with them on a regular basis? Can be a very good indicator of at least the health of the relationship. If you do have information about the adoption rates and usage activities, usage patterns within your products, your offerings, that information can also be very good as well. It's not necessarily, again, somebody can, an organization could be using, quite a bit of volume and still churn out, but signals like, again, I just dropped 20% of my usage, can be a really big indicator of something needs to be addressed. So the health will typically be on a number of different factors. The engagement rates that you have with them, the adoption rates either by volume, by module, whatever metric makes the most sense. Support interactions are a big piece. Financial interactions are a big piece. But really, you have to look at the data that you have and really understand some of the stories along with that data to build your health model. And that's, again, having a tool like Totango really makes it a lot easier because you have all of that data at your fingertips and you can build events and you can modify them and monitor them over time. But the exercise of going in and understanding the business and designing the health is an excellent exercise in and of itself.
Great, thank you. Laura asked, can you give some examples of effective adoption and change management tactics that can help cement your adoption stage of your customer journey? So
yes. So with adoption, especially coming in out of a little bit sort of outside of what we're talking about here today, but coming out of an onboarding period where we're sort of result driven. If you have a complex product, that's typically going to be some period of time where you have people on professional services building. And what you're trying to do in an adoption period post onboarding is to make sure that what's been delivered so far is right and useful and being used by the customer. So that involves regular communication. It might involve some retraining. It might involve some direct communication, but effectively building out to understand if you have a product that's supported by a one-to-many, much of this would be done through sort of a tech touch model, but you're communicating with them, you're helping them train, and monitoring their usage to see what are the things that I can do to help them grow in usage, grow in the adoption rate of the offering.
Great. Okay. More and more questions. I'm just going through them. How, as an individual contributor, can you influence management to focus on moving stage to stage? And this specific person, Cecilia, is curious about heroic to mapped, but how can you, in any stage, help influence management?
Well, I think in a lot of cases this really comes down to you have a hypothesis, you test it, and you show the results. Like making any change in a business, what you're looking for is we're baselined, we're doing X. it has these results. We've tested something else out here. We're getting an improved result out of it. If you have the ability in your own interactions with your own customers, where you can, if you can start to follow your own managed process, obviously not breaking too far out of what your company needs you to do, because there are a lot of resources that are expended on helping define that. But where you can, if you can follow your own defined process, look at the results, understand what's happening with the interactions. It may be something as simple as what's my response rate on an email template? Does answering with regards or thanks actually help? It could be something as simple as that. Do I actually get the interaction rates that I want? Or it can be along the lines of, if I go in hard on a customer for a hard negotiation during an upsell or renewal period, then does that actually cause a negative discussion? If I come in and say, hey, you owe me money, versus, hey, let's talk about the next year's worth of value, does that actually result in something positive or negative? And again, that may depend quite a bit on your experience within the team, your customer base, and the organization that you're working with.
Great, thank you. So some questions have come up about customer success tools or technology. Richard wanted to know, is it level 2 before purchasing a customer success solution? Or maybe you could just speak about the role of Totango along the maturity roadmap and which level you see it being a good decision.
Yeah, I honestly, as I said, I've done this job on spreadsheets and email. I've done it with a platform. It's much easier at any stage with a platform. I think and obviously I'm a bit biased here, but even if you're still operating in an ad hoc mode, the ability to gather all the data in one place, to get even the basics of visibility and health, even if all you're doing is collecting all the information in one place, so your CSMs don't have to go hunt things around the organization, around other systems, can save you a really significant amount of money. Right? It's just in terms of operational performance there. But you will get better results when you go through the process and have those defined capabilities further on. So I would say it's not a prerequisite to be at a stage before you buy a technology any more than it is a prerequisite to have a technology before you change your business operations. It's a great enabler, and it'll only help to shed more visibility onto the changes that you may want to make, just because it's sort of the fundamental purpose for having a tool like this is first get the visibility, then get the understanding of the changes, and have a managed way to deliver your response and your process.
Thanks. Aaron wanted to know more about, obviously team size and your business model complexity will come into play about where you are on the maturity model. So to what degree would an early stage startup need optimization as much as a large organization? And how do you suggest identifying where you maybe, he puts in quotes, overbaking CS within the org?
Yeah. I think that, a lot of cases, especially for a small to mid organization, mid-sized organization, the idea of building a continuous process improvement, a formal practice around that, like you would see at a big consulting shop or a big SI, helping to enable that, would absolutely be overkill. However, having a practice of going back in and looking at what you've learned on a quarterly basis absolutely makes sense for any size company. I think that I defy you to point to any successful organization that doesn't have some degree of introspection about that. So, again, this isn't necessarily intended to be, small companies go here, big companies go here, or this is your score and you're stuck to it. The point of this model is really to help you understand ways that you can go as you roll out customer success within your organization.
Great, thank you. Okay, so there's a question about they're currently competing, from Scott, competing with sales around who owns the customer relationship, and how do you begin the approach of centralizing customer success as its own functional group, and that it draws collaboration from product sales and success?
That is an excellent question. So there are obviously a lot of different models around this. We see organizations where customer success is its own function under a chief customer officer or the like. There are some structures where customer success actually rolls up under sales. There are other organizational structures that work with CS as part of a professional services or support organization. There's no hard answer on what's the right approach. I think the most important piece is when you talk about the argument between sales and customer success over who owns the customer, the company owns the customer. The customer success, and if you do have that hard delineation between who owns revenue and who owns, who's looking at the relationship. If there's an adversarial relationship between sales and CS, that's something that really needs to get fixed, right? It's not a matter of who wins; it's a matter of how you work together. And if that's CS owns renewals and upsells, and sales owns new business, fine. If it's a matter of sales owns all revenue and customer success is in a function to make sure a customer gets the greatest value in order for the company to realize higher retention and greater long-term value out of the customer, also fine. So I think rather than sort of saying who owns it, making sure that there's a way to bridge the gap between the organizations and really get partnerships so that you don't have customer success working against sales, working against product, working against marketing. All of them really need to work together. And the point of customer success and the point of a customer-centric organization is to make sure that that you do have an advocate for how both the customer and the company are able to get value out of the relationship.
Great, thank you. Okay, I think we have time maybe just for one more. So I think that there's a couple questions that are related. There's wanting to know about the size of your CS team. How do you know how to structure it? Is it based off of according to revenue, company size? What's the ratio that they should have between CSM to customers? Someone was kind of curious if maybe the number of accounts that each CSM manages, does that influence the maturity level for the company? So maybe how do you go about structuring your customer success team?
It'll typically vary. It'll vary quite a bit between customers, but in most cases, the broad organization will be between some high-touch engagement model and some lower-touch or technical touch engagement model. So when you're talking about the question about how many customers does each CSM get, that may vary, right? If you have customers that by the nature of the product or the relationship or the service level that they bought have a higher expectation and need and entitlement to a very high level of service, then obviously you're going to have a much smaller amount or a much smaller number of customers per CSM. Whereas if you have low price, high volume, low expectation of personal touch, the number of customers can be quite a bit higher. In a lot of cases, we talk about this really being more around having a standard for the book of business for a customer. If you have segments set up in a way that makes sense, and again, might be based on price tag, might be based on product, might be based on really any metric or any characteristic. What you're looking for there is to have really a predictable model, and with some experimentation, you'll find out what that number is. But I think starting from an expectation of managing a book of business and growing that, or managing against health on that book, is a decent way to go. And we'll see that vary again quite a bit based on based on the products, based on the market that you're in. But for a lot of SaaS companies, we see that typically within maybe $1.5 to $2 million mark, but that's not a hard rule.
Great, thank you. Thank you to the entire audience for being so interactive and engaging with questions. I'm sorry we couldn't answer all of them today, but we will follow up. We will also send out the recording and the PDF of the slides to you guys in an email. Thank you, Jim, for your time today and walking us through this framework.